Hello folks, hope you're having a very good Tuesday. Hope everything's going well for you. Things are going well over here. We have our health, we have our whatever we're doing today. We're cracking on with some marking today. Marking a lot of very nice essays on the fall of the Roman Republic. So that's very nice, and I thought I'd have a little bit of a break and come on here and do a bit of a rant about Space Marines. If you like what I do, please subscribe to the channel. If you do so, you really do help me grow, and you're amazing for doing so. So thank you if you've already subscribed. That's awesome. We're trying to get to 15,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If we can do that, I think we are doing splendidly well. We also have a prize draw for Composite Games down below. It is their own prize draw. If you want to enter that in, all you need to do is go down there and basically give to their GoFundMe page or over there. And what that can do is it helps them essentially move location, or at least beef up the location that they're in. It's always very important that we always support good local stores. They're the ones who keep us going. They're the ones who, let's be honest, are doing most of the legwork when it comes to making sure we have people to play in the hobby. So, let's support them when they're good ones, eh? Moving on. Oh, also my Patreon's down below if you want to, buy me a pint or something. That's down below. Moving on, though. This is going to be a bit of a double-edged sword of a video, because it's positive and negative. Because Space Marines, to me, in 40k, are absolutely bonkers from a writing point of view. Alright? I have a very weird opinion about Space Marines, and that is they are the best and worst parts of Warhammer 40,000, in all honesty. I love the models, don't get me wrong, that's why I collect them mostly, but on the flip side of that, they are also people who take up a hell of a lot of airtime within the hobby, and sometimes their lore can leave me scratching my head a little. When every other piece of lore in the setting is pretty much well geared towards 40k being 40k, even more weird ones like the Tau and the Necrons, they still do lead in to the larger patchwork of Warhammer 40,000 in a very nice and elegant way. There are some Space Marine chapters and legions, though, who generally don't do this. I'm not talking about Chaos here. Chaos get a bit of a pass, mainly because they're Chaos and they're mental by design. If your good guys are acting this way, though, it can lead to a bit of tonal whiplash, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. So, Space Marines are bonkers, but let's be honest, they are also a quintessential part of the Warhammer 40,000 hobby. Let's be honest, when you think of 40k, even as a Tyranid player, a Tau player, whatever, when you think of 40k, the Space Marines, for the most part, are what you think of. They're what jumps into your brain first and foremost, is that stoic, angry dude in power armor walking towards you with a bolter in his hand. That's what you think of when you think of Warhammer 40k. Even looking at the Primaris Marine, just have a little look on Google if you can. This is what we do on this channel, by the way. I don't do editing because I don't really have the time. I'm rushing through these videos. So go on Google. Just go on Google. Type in Primaris Marine. And if you can do, type in Firstborn Marine. Yeah, original Space Marine. Games Workshop went back to their iconic design for the Space Marines, and they changed it. Look at the helmets if you don't believe me. We have gone from a slightly comically Darth Vader rip-off helmet to a sleek and heroic sci-fi one. Not only does this represent the change in the entire setting, in its outlook and the way it's going, it is a change that, quite frankly, I agree with, because I think the Primaris Marines look cooler than the standard Marines. But this was a change made for a more cynical reason than this looks cool. It was made to move the setting in a more toned down fashion, like go in that direction. But it was also made because the Space Marines are so intrinsic to 40k, so important to its design, that their entire design was retrofitted to avoid them looking too much like something else in the genre, i.e. a Darth Vader, or anything else that you could, let's say, mistake for being a Space Marine. Can you imagine Tyranids being changed in this way to look less like Xenomorphs? Because they do look like them. Of course you can't, right? Because Games Workshop does not care about Tyranids beyond them being fodder for the good guys. Space Marines, on the other hand, are intrinsic to the core experience of what Warhammer 40,000 is, whether you like it or not. So, where the Space Marine shines, in terms of the lore though, is in his creation process. The process of a Space Marine being constructed is incredibly interesting, and deals with several implants being introduced to the body of the selected youth who's going to become a Marine, or at least attempt to. We hear about the age at which children are taken to become Marines, what happens to them in the selection process, which differs from chapter to chapter. We have quite mundane tests, kind of like you're joining the Men in Black when you go to somebody like the Ultramarines, to harrowing and deadly tests to become Blood Angels, or, Emperor forbid, you are picked up by one of the Black ships and sent to attempt to become a Grey Knight. We hear about the implantation process, the growth of the body as it transforms eventually into a Scout Marine and, in time, a fully fledged Space Marine. The price of this process in personnel and effort on the part of the Imperium shows us how scarce and awesome Space Marines actually are. Their power level is earned by the hardships they go through to become what they are. This is absolutely fantastic lore, and it is in things like this that Warhammer 40,000 really shines, and you can see now why I think Space Marines in general are so incredibly intrinsic to what 40k is and what it can become in the future. When Space Marines are cooking, in terms of lore, when they're shining to the point that people are really enjoying them, that's when 40k to me is at its very, very best. So what's the problem then? If I have all of these glaring positives to point out about how Space Marines work well, what's the problem? Well, the problem comes in the form of the lore for the chapters themselves. Now, I know I will get hate for this, and this is not a problem that will ever be solved in my opinion. It is my own issue, my own opinion, but I thought it would be an interesting thing to share in a video, and it boils down to this. Most of the most popular Space Marine chapters read like they were written by 13-year-olds. Alright? In this video, I'm going to use 3 specific examples. If I use your chapter as an example, please don't be offended. At the end of the day, we're talking about toy soldiers here. I love them, you love them, but that is what they are. So please don't go overboard in your responses to my video, right? It is literally just me going over the things I think don't quite work in terms of Space Marines fitting into the larger tapestry of 40k. Alright? Cool. These are just opinions. I am a moron. So just take that into consideration before you go anywhere. So, the first of the 3 subject matter chapters that I want to talk about in terms of being bonkers in a bad way. That's what we're looking at here. These chapters have bonkers lore in a bad way that takes me out of my immersion. It takes me out of being immersed in Warhammer 40k and makes me roll my eyes and kind of cringe a little bit, right? Okay, Chapter 1. The Blood Angels. Yes. This is a bipolar chapter for me, with an incredible backstory when it comes to Sanguinius and his tragic effect on the psyche of his legion and chapter. That is the good stuff. That's the good stuff. The bad lore creeps into the fact that these are literally hokey vampires in space. Almost all of the intrinsic nuance of the Blood Angels is stripped away by the fact that they are essentially vampires, and that's pretty much it. That is all people boil them down to in this age of frequent memery. This could be solved by simply having the Blood Angels act like the Revenant Legion from before the arrival of Sanguinius. Back then, They were literally cannibals because one of their implants that allows them to see the memories of fallen foes by devouring them is very overactive and almost addictive in nature. There. No space vampires. The Blood Angels are now a credible and viable threat that does not break the fourth wall with their very nature. What we need of the Blood Angels is to be more grimdark. We don't need them to be Castlevania in space. Quite simple, really. And that's how we're going to be approaching these 3 chapters. I think the Blood Angels are, in a way, are the easiest fix of the 3 chapters that I've picked. Mainly because they have that one lore thing that's already there that could just be pumped up and the rest of it jettisoned away. We don't need the vampirism, we don't need all of that stuff, just take it away, don't need it, don't want it, right? That's what I mean when it comes to 40k lore being a bit too bonkers though. When you look at the modern day Blood Angels, what do you see in the lore? You see extended canines. You see people who are literally vampires in space. And to me, it just strips them. It takes away all of the depth and the nuance and the clever writing and the callbacks and all of that cool stuff that's in the Blood Angels chapter, and it goes. It simply goes. You have characters like Mephiston, and you have characters like Astaroth and all these other people who are, you know, essentially psychic vampires in space. That, to me, I know Mephiston has cool books. I'm not saying the books aren't very good. I'm saying the very nature of how he is pulls me out of the setting as it is, and that is a failure of lore. It simply is. Sorry, that's my missus messaging me, despite me asking, please, I'm recording. Ugh. That was me, by the way, so don't be checking your phones or your computers. That's me. So, Space Wolves are next. Now, this is the shortest one that I've written about, because I've said all this before, you know? So, alright, let's get this out of the way with the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves would be better served if they actually acted like Vikings. I've said this before numerous times on the channel. The Space Wolves, if you want to fix them, and unlike the Blood Angels, need an intrinsic rework and rebuild. The Space Wolves as a faction concept are incredibly interesting. In fact, they're probably a faction I would collect. Because I like Viking stuff, I think it's pretty cool, right? Thing is, they don't act like Vikings. Space Wolves should be pirates in space, and they should all be, by far, the smallest Space Marine chapter. There should only be about 500 of them left, if that, and they should be on their own longboat-like ships going around and raiding everybody for their stuff. I would have kept the month of shame as it was, right, after the Armageddon conflict, but I would have had it split the Space Wolves down the middle and annihilate half of them, so only half of them get away, and even those go their own separate ways and are declared renegades, right? So they're still loyal to the Imperium, but they're out there doing their own thing. If you want to be independent, Space Wolves, then you need to be independent. You can't spit in the face of the Imperium and continue to be the good guys in the setting. That's not how it works. Okay? Pick a lane and stick to it. You can't have it all at once. I would have the Space Wolves now act like pirates, going after ecclesiarchy forces and chaos alike. As, in terms of the Space Wolves, you are not representing the Emperor's vision anymore. That would be cool. I would collect that army, because underdogs who have flaws are almost always more interesting than heroes who never fucking lose. So, don't get me started with the Fenris stuff, by the way, with the Thousand Suns. That was not a loss. In fact, a normal Space Wolf clapped the cheeks of Magnus the Red. I'm not even getting into that. That's ridiculous. As they are, the Space Wolves are literally cartoon Viking cosplayers in space who look like they take the name Wolves after everything, and that's pretty much it. They even tragically try to use the name Vulca Fenrica in the Horus Heresy to try and adopt a more Norse name and pull themselves away from the furry crowd. It didn't work. It cannot work. It is too intrinsically linked to who the Space Wolves are now. They are some of the most over-the-top, cheesy, and downright lame-looking models that Games Workshop has ever produced. I apologise to you if you like them. If I face them across the battlefield in a real game of 40k, I pray that my missus or anybody that I like doesn't come into the store because I would die of second-hand embarrassment. That is the harshest rejection anyone can give to any army in this hobby, and I give it to the Space Wolves. The worst thing though, the Space Wolves are not Warhammer 40,000. Yeah, that's the worst thing. They just aren't. They look nothing like a Grimdark Space Marine chapter. They should be on the cover of a cereal box or something. There is nothing to them. The most interesting aspect of them is that they can sometimes become werewolves. Really? That's where we are. At least the Blood Angels hint at being vampires, whereas Games Workshop just spunked their load everywhere with the Space Wolves, didn't they? And just said, no, they're literally werewolves. That is their flaw, by the way. Werewolves can be kind of cool. What's the flaw of the Space Wolves that makes them relatable? They can become something cooler than what they actually start off as. Piss right off. Poor writing. Somebody at Games Workshop clearly really likes Space Wolves. Unlike the Blood Angels, who are, with a tweak or two, they can become cool again, the Space Wolves are way too far gone for me to ever take them seriously. They are bonkers in the worst way, and that's why I avoid them if I can, like the plague. They don't take part in any of my custom chapters battles. I try to avoid Space Wolf players. I know that's wrong, but I just don't like I don't like playing against cartoon characters. I just don't like. I look over it and I say, oh look, it's Space Vikings. Like, at least with Blood Angels, you can change them to look however you want, and they are quintessential old school Marines. The amount of fur and rubbish that is all over a Space Wolf, I'm just, oh god. You know, I know people say, well, there's demons in 40k, aren't they? Yeah, they're demons, dude. They're supposed to look weird. These aren't. These aren't. These are Space Marines, man. Come on. I don't mean they all need to look uniform. They should all look pretty different, but they should look grounded and grimdark. Not like Space Wolves. If I ever see an opponent getting that fucking chariot out that Grimnar has, I continue playing the game, I make sure they have a good time, but I just think to myself, oh no, I can't. I just can't, man. They look so silly. It's just so bonkers and silly. Alright, moving on. The final example, and the one that I think will be the most controversial, which is why I think if you were listening to the Space Wolves part, you're going to be thinking, the most controversial? What? Yeah. The White Scars. Probably the most controversial of my picks here, I know. The White Scars, in all honesty, are they're kind of fucking lame, dude. There is such a thing as sticking far too close to your historical inspirations, and just like how the Space Wolves are cartoon Vikings dressing up for the weekend in space, the White Scars are essentially Mongols in space. That is the long and short of their depth. That's it. Every facet, every inch of their lore can be traced back to the Mongol Empire. Look, take it from... I've taught entire modules on the Mongol Empire. Take it from me. Every single facet of the White Scars is essentially Mongols in space. From the way they hunt, to the way they fight, the way they talk, their spirituality, their customs, everything. Now, there is nothing wrong with having a historical basis for a chapter or army. Hell, I do the same with my own chapter and feudal Japan. The chapter that I created have a lot of leanings towards feudal Japan. There is a very good reason however, that I stayed away from third-party pieces of armour that make my Space Marines look like samurai Space Marines, though. There's a very good reason I stayed away from that. That reason is that they are not fucking samurai. They are influenced by samurai, flavoured by them, but they are not actually feudal Japanese warriors. The White Scars did not get this fucking memo, and this hurts me, because I really like the White Scars, and I really want to be into them. I really want to read their lore and nod and go, these guys are awesome. Do you know why? Because their attitude is awesome. Everything about the White Scars is great. Their attitude, their outlook, everything about who they are is great. The fact that they ride bikes all the time, it's awesome, man. I love it, right? But they lean way too far into it. And I'm sorry, Chris Rate fans. I'm sorry. I like the books as well. But he does nothing to separate the White Scars from this historical context. All the White Scars are literally is a lazy rehash of Genghis Khan in space. That is it. That is all they are. Take it from somebody who knows, my friend. I've taught about this subject a lot over the years. I love the Mongol Empire. It's my second favourite historical time period. I've read the secret history, or at least the excerpts of the secret history of the Mongols that we have. Alright? Every single thing about the Mongol Empire I've devoured over the years. When I tell you, the White Scars are literally just that, in space, I mean it. They are even worse for this than the Space Wolves. Because the Space Wolves don't even try to be historical, right? The Space Wolves literally are just cosplayers in space. The White Scars aren't cosplayers. They're literally Mongols. In space. That's it. That's it. Every facet of their history, their world, their chapter, their culture, their religions, their customs, everything is ripped straight from Mongolia and China of that time period. They are in the middle ground between the extremes of the Blood Angels and Space Wolves for how you would fix them. But their rework to make them believable would require one of two things, or both, and neither of which will ever happen. Number one, they need a reason for why their world is so much like Mongolia and China. What happened in the Dark Age of technology to push it there, right? Then you can have Mongols in space. Kind of, but it'd still be hokey as shit. Number two, they need a vast stripping away of the lazy comparisons with the Mongols. In other words, I would keep the bikes. I would keep the titles of Khan and Kargan. I would keep the look of the Legion ethnically and where they come from, right? Everything else, I would strip away. Everything else. Gone. In other words, their link to their historical influence needs more nuance. A lot more. In fact, we need to hide it away under the hood. Games Workshop, you can't just plagiarise history and pass it off as your own lore. They are the laziest Legion and chapter in the entire setting. They've gotten better in 40k, but not by much. Right now, they read like someone who read a Wikipedia page about Genghis Khan thought he would make a cool Primarch and a Legion. That's it. And it takes me out of it every single time I read about them, dude. Every single time. I can't take these blokes seriously. I can't. I just can't. You know? I know Ultramarines haters will say, well, they're just Greco-Romans in space. The influences are there, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot more nuance to the Ultramarines and their Greco-Roman influences, right? Their Greco-Roman influences are very much under the surface. Yes, the architecture of the world say that isn't so, but trust me, the way they act, the way they go about their business is not Roman or Greek in the slightest. In fact, the Iron Warriors have more in common with the Greeks than the bloody Ultramarines do, so don't even go there, right? It's Aesthetically, true, yes. The Ultramarines look a little bit like they are Greco-Roman, but the way they act, the way their culture is, the way they go about their business is not Greco-Roman, right? It's almost like Gilliman he's like Caesar from Caesar's Legion in Fallout New Vegas. He saw something he thought was inspirational and adopted it as his own. And there's nothing wrong with that, because there is a reason for that to happen. The White Scars are literally Mongols ripped from the pages of history, given a slap of paint and thrown into 40k, and it's lame as fuck. And that's from a historian. I use, history in my own writing all of the time, but you cannot just lift them from one place into another. It needs your own nuance and skill as a writer to make it work in your setting. If you can't do that, your story's kind of lame. I'm sorry. Your lore's kind of lame. If you gone, well, these are just Teutonic Knights. Okay, well, why aren't they like the what differentiates them from the Teutonic Knights in real life? Nothing. I just thought they'd work really well in the setting. That's lame. That's lame. I know. It's your setting. You have anything that you could do in the world in your setting, and you chose to just do that. Change it a little bit. Work something in. What do? Maybe these Teutonic Knights are drug addicts, and they need drugs to keep their powers and shit. That'd be a cool way to take them. They're still Teutonic Knights, but they got that darker edge. Right? Maybe they're Teutonic Knights, but they're like the Spartans, in that they're actually secretly all lovers, if you want to take it in the opposite direction. So they're like the Sacred Band of Thebes. That'd be a cool place for them to go. Do you see what I mean? You've taken something from history and injected something that you like on top of it and used it for your setting. Now it's interesting. Now I want to know more. With the White Scars, I don't want to know more, because I already fucking know it. What's the point? So that's my issue with Space Marines in short. At least these three main chapters. Most of them, most of the big ones anyway, are a little too bonkers for me to take seriously. This is why I heavily gravitate to the more grounded factions in terms of their aesthetic, creed, and influence. The Grey Knights are a fine example, right? They are knights in space, but there's a very good reason for that. They were created to be knights in space. They were created to take down literal demons. They need to look and feel like people who would go after demons and kill them. Everything about the Grey Knights is engineered for banishing demons. Everything about them. The way they look, the way they move, the way they talk, even their names are anathema to demonkind. It works in the lore. As are the Black Templars. And I know a lot of you would have been sitting there thinking, well, hang on a minute, the Black Templars are just fundamental Christian knights in space. No. No. They have a very, very, very organic journey to becoming what they are. The Black Templars' journey starts with Sigismund in the Horus Heresy and the characters like him fighting for Dawn, and that journey is almost perfect in the way it sets up the Black Templars as the poster boys of what the Imperium becomes. Intolerant, dogmatic, and incredibly obsessed with the Emperor as a god concept. Because they got that from Sigismund. And the people like him, they were forged in the fires of combat. They're not just crusading Templar knights lifted from history and thrown into 40k. In fact, the Templars of 40k, the Black Templars, have very little in common beyond their aesthetic with the actual Knights Templar. In a very similar way to how the Ultramarines, aside from their certain parts of their aesthetic, have very little in common with the Roman Empire and the Greek city-states. Very little in common with them at all, right? Because Games Workshop took those fundamental things, right? Greco-Romans, or the Roman Empire and the Greek city-states, and Knights Templar, and they had the talent in the writing room to make something of them themselves. Remember when I said that the White Scars should take influence from history rather than being cosplayers of it? This is the kind of storytelling that I meant. Other chapters like the Raven Guard, Salamanders, although the name sucks, Dark Angels, and Iron Hands all have awesome, believable, and quintessentially 40k aesthetics and stories that make complete sense in the setting. In short, they aren't lazy rehashes of ancient ideas and historical societies. They're not vampires, they're not werewolves who cosplay as Vikings, and they're not literal Mongols in space. They're their own things, made their own by Warhammer 40,000, and how cool and grimdark it actually is. What do you think, though? Have I gone beyond the pale here? Have I lost my marbles? Let me know in the comment section down below. I love you all a long time. I'll speak to you tomorrow for some more Hobby Nightmares. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you then. Have a good one. Bye now.